Chapter 8 of Commentary on the Book of Genesis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Commentary on the Book of Genesis by Matthew Henry. Chapter 8. In the close of the foregoing chapter, we left the world in ruins and the church in straits. But in this chapter we have the repair of the one and the enlargement of the other. Now the scene alters, and another face of things begins to be presented to us. And the brighter side of that cloud which there appeared so black and dark, for, though God contend long, he will not contend forever, nor be always wrath. We have here, numeral 1, the earth made anew, by the recess of the waters and the appearing of the dry land, now a second time, and both gradual. Number 1. The increase of the waters is stayed, verses 1 and 2. Number 2. They begin sensibly to abate, verse 3. Number 3. After 16 days ebbing, the ark rest, verse 4. Number 4. After 60 days ebbing, the tops of the mountains appear above water, verse 5. Number 5. After 40 days ebbing, and 20 days before the mountains appeared, Noah began to send out his spies, a raven and a dove, to gain intelligence, verses 6 through 12. Number 6. 2 months after the appearing of the tops of the mountains, the waters had gone, and the face of the earth was dry, verse 13. Though not dried so as to be fit for man till almost 2 months after, verse 14. Numeral 2. Man placed anew upon the earth, in which, number 1, Noah's discharge and departure out of the ark, verses 15 through 19. Number 2, his sacrifice of praise, which he offered to God upon his enlargement, verse 20. Number 3, God's acceptance of his sacrifice and the promise he made thereupon not to drown the world again, verses 21 and 22. And thus, at length, mercy rejoices against judgment. The earth becomes dry. B.C. 2349. And God remembered Noah, and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. Here is, numeral 1, an act of God's grace. God remembered Noah and every living thing. This is an expression after the manner of men, for not any of his creatures, Luke 12, verse 6, much less any of his people, are forgotten of God, Isaiah 49, verses 15 and 16. But, number 1, the whole race of mankind, except Noah and his family, was now extinguished, and driven into the land of forgetfulness, to be remembered no more, so that God's remembering Noah was the return of his mercy to mankind, of whom he would not make a full end. It is a strange expression, Ezekiel 5, verse 13. When I have accomplished my fury in them, I will be comforted. The demands of divine justice had been answered by the ruin of those sinners. He had eased him of his adversaries, Isaiah 1, verse 24. And now his spirit was quieted, Zechariah 6, verse 8. And he remembered Noah and every living thing. He remembered mercy in wrath, Habakkuk 3, verse 2. Remembered the days of old, Isaiah 63, verse 11. Remembered the holy seed, and then remembered Noah. Number 2, Noah himself, the one that had found grace in the eyes of the Lord, yet seemed to be forgotten in the ark, and perhaps began to think himself so, for we do not find that God had told him how long he should be confined and when he should be released. Very good men have sometimes been ready to conclude themselves forgotten of God, especially when their afflictions have been unusually grievous and long. Perhaps Noah, though a great believer, yet when he found the flood continuing so long after it might reasonably be presumed to have done its work, was tempted to fear, lest he that shut him in would keep him in, and began to expostulate. How long wilt thou forget me? But at length God returned in mercy to him, and this is expressed by remembering him. Note, those that remember God shall certainly be remembered by him, how desolate and disconsolate soever their condition may be. He will appoint them a set time and remember them. Job 14, verse 13. Number 3. With Noah, God remembered every living thing. For, though his delight is especially in the sons of men, yet he rejoices in all his works, and hates nothing that he has made. He takes special care, not only of his people's persons, but of their possessions, of them and all that belongs to them. He considered the cattle of Nineveh. Jonah 4, verse 11. Numeral 2. An act of God's power over wind and water, both of which are at his beck, though neither of them is under man's control. Observe. Number 1. He commanded the wind and said to that, Go, and it went, in order to the carrying off of the flood. God made a wind to pass over the earth. See here, subscript 1. What was God's remembrance of Noah? It was his relieving him. Note, those whom God remembers, he remembers effectually. For good, he remembers us to save us, that we may remember him to serve him. Subscript 2. What a sovereign dominion God has over the winds. He has them in his fist, Proverbs 30, verse 4, and brings them out of his treasuries, Psalms 135, verse 7. He sends them when and whither and for what purposes he pleases. Even stormy winds fulfill his word, Psalms 48, verse 8. It should seem, while the waters increased, there was no wind, for that would have added to the toss of the ark. But now God sent a wind when it would not be so troublesome. Probably it was a north wind, for that drives away rain. However, it was a drying wind, such a wind as God sent to divide the Red Sea before Israel. Exodus 14, verse 21. Number 2. He remanded the waters and said to them, Come, and they came. Subscript 1. He took away the cause. He sealed up the springs of those waters, the fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven. Note, subpoint 1. As God has a key to open, so he has a key to shut up again, and to stay the progress of judgments by stopping the causes of them. And the same hand that brings the desolation must bring the deliverance. To that hand, therefore, our eye must ever be. He that wounds is alone able to heal. See Job 12, verses 14 and 15. Subpoint 2. When afflictions have done the work for which they are sent, whether killing work or curing work, they shall be removed. God's word shall not return void. Isaiah 45, verse 10 and 11. Subscript 2. Then the effect ceased, not all at once, but by degrees. The waters abated, verse 1, returned from off the earth continually. They were going and returning, verse 3, which denotes a gradual departure. The heat of the sun exhaled much, and perhaps the subterraneous caverns soaked in more. Note, as the earth was not drowned in a day, so it was not dried in a day. In the creation, it was but one day's work to clear the earth from the waters that covered it, and to make it dry land. Nay, it was but half a day's work. Chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. But the work of creation being finished, this work of providence was effected by the concurring influence of second causes, yet thus enforced by the almighty power of God. God usually works deliverance for his people gradually, that the day of small things may not be despised, nor the day of great things despaired of. Zechariah 4, verse 10. See Proverbs 4, verse 18. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 7th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. Here we have the effects and evidences of the ebbing of the waters. Number 1, the ark rested. This was some satisfaction to Noah, to feel the house he was in upon firm ground and no longer movable. It rested upon a mountain, whether it was directed not by Noah's prudence, he did not steer it, but by the wise and gracious providence of God, that it might rest the sooner. Note, God has times and places of rest for his people after their tossings, And many a time he provides for their seasonable and comfortable settlement without their own contrivance and quite beyond their own foresight. The ark of the church, though sometimes tossed with tempest, and not comforted, Isaiah 54 verse 11, yet has its rest, Acts 9 verse 31. Number 2, the tops of the mountains were seen like little islands appearing above the water. We must suppose that they were seen by Noah and his sons, for there was none besides to see them. It is probable that they had looked through the window of the ark every day, like the longing mariners, after a tedious voyage, to see if they could discover land, or as the prophet's servant, 1 Kings 18 verses 43 and 44. And at length they spy ground, and enter the day of discovery in their journal. They felt ground about 40 days before they saw it, according to Dr. Lightfoot's computation, whence he infers that, if the waters decreased proportionally, the ark drew 11 cubits in water. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days, that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro, until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him, to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. We have here an account of the spies which Noah sent forth to bring him intelligence from abroad, a raven and a dove. Observe here, numeral 1, that though God had told Noah particularly when the flood would come, even to a day, chapter 6, verse 4, yet he did not give him a particular account by revelation at what times and by what steps it should go away. Number 1, because the knowledge of the former was necessary in his preparing the ark and settling himself in it, but the knowledge of the latter would serve only to gratify his curiosity, and the concealing of it from him would be the needful exercise of his faith and patience. And, number 2, he could not foresee the flood, but by revelation. But he might, by ordinary means, discover the decrease of it, and therefore God was pleased to leave him to the use of them. Numeral 2, that though Noah by faith expected his enlargement, and by patience waited for it, yet he was inquisitive concerning it, as one that thought it long to be thus confined. Note, desires of release out of trouble, earnest expectations of it, and inquiries concerning its advances toward us, will very well consist with the sincerity of faith and patience. He that believes does not make haste to run before God, but he does make haste to go forth to meet him. Isaiah 38 verse 16. Particularly, number 1, Noah sent forth a raven through the window of the ark, which went forth, as the Hebrew phrase is, going forth and returning. That is, flying about and feeding on the carcasses that floated, but returning to the ark for rest, probably not in it, but upon it. This gave Noah little satisfaction. Therefore, number 2, he sent forth a dove, which returned the first time with no good news, but probably wet and dirty. But the second time she brought an olive leaf in her bill, which appeared to be first plucked off, a plain indication that now the trees, the fruit trees, began to appear above water. Note here, subscript 1, that Noah sent forth the dove the second time 7 days after the first time, and the third time was after 7 days too, and probably the first sending of her out was 7 days after the sending forth of the raven. This intimates that it was done on the Sabbath day, which, it should seem, Noah religiously observed in the ark. Having kept the Sabbath in the solemn assembly of his little church, he then expected special blessings from heaven, and inquired concerning them. Having directed his prayer, he looked up, Psalms 5 verse 3. Subscript 2, the dove is an emblem of a gracious soul, which finding no rest for its foot, no solid peace or satisfaction in this world, this deluged, defiling world, returns to Christ as to its ark, as to its Noah. The carnal heart, like the raven, takes up with the world, and feeds on the carrions it finds there. But return thou to thy rest, O my soul, to thy Noah, so the word is. Psalms 116, verse 7. Oh, that I had wings like a dove to flee to him. Psalms 55, verse 6. And as Noah put forth his hand and took the dove and pulled her into him, into the ark, so Christ will graciously preserve and help and welcome those that fly to him for rest. Subscript 3. The olive branch, which was an emblem of peace, was brought not by the raven, a bird of prey, nor by a gay and proud peacock, but by a mild, patient, humble dove. It is a dove-like disposition that brings into the soul earnest of rest and joy. Subscript 4. Some make these things an allegory. The law was first sent forth like the raven, but brought no tidings of the assuaging of the waters of God's wrath, with which the world of mankind was deluged. Therefore, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his gospel as the dove, in the likeness of which the Holy Spirit descended, and this presents us with an olive branch and brings in a better hope. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, was the earth dried. Here is, number 1, the ground dry, verse 13. That is, all the water carried off it, which, upon the 1st day of the month, a joyful New Year's day it was, Noah was himself an eyewitness of. He removed the covering of the ark, not the whole covering, but so much as would suffice to give him a prospect of the earth about it, and a most comfortable prospect he had. For behold and wonder, the face of the ground was dry. Note, subscript 1, it is a great mercy to see ground about us. Noah was more sensible of it than we are, for mercies restored are much more affecting than mercies continued. Subscript 2. The divine power which now renewed the face of the earth can renew the face of an afflicted, troubled soul and of a distressed, persecuted church. He can make dry ground to appear even when it seemed to have been lost and forgotten. Psalm 18, verse 16. Number 2. The ground dried, verse 14, so as to be a fit habitation for Noah. Observe, though Noah saw the ground dry the 1st day of the 1st month, yet God would not suffer him to go out of the ark till the 27th day of the 2nd month. Perhaps Noah, being somewhat weary of his restraint, would have quitted the ark at first, but God, in his kindness to him, ordered him to stay so much longer. Note, God consults our benefit rather than our desires, for he knows what is good for us better than we do for ourselves, and how long it is fit our restraint should continue and desired mercy should be delayed. We should go out of the ark before the ground is dried, and perhaps if the door be shut, are ready to remove the covering and to climb up some other way. But we should be satisfied that God's time of showing mercy is certainly the best time, when the mercy is ripe for us and we are ready for it. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. Here is, numeral 1, Noah's dismission out of the ark, verses 15 through 17. Observe, number 1, Noah did not stir till God bade him, as he had a command to go into the ark, chapter 7, verse 1. So, how tedious soever his confinement there was, he would wait for a command to go out of it again. Note, we must in all our ways acknowledge God, and set him before us in all our removes. Those only go under God's protection that follow God's direction and submit to his government. Those that steadily adhere to God's word as their rule, and are guided by his grace as their principle, and take hints from his providence to assist them in their application of general directions to particular cases, may in faith see him guiding their motions in their march through this wilderness. Number 2. Though God detained him long, yet at last he gave him his discharge, for the vision is for an appointed time, and at the end it shall speak. It shall speak truth, Habakkuk 2, verse 3. It shall not lie. Number 3. God had said, "Come into the ark," which he says, not "come forth," but "go forth," which intimates that God, who sent in with him, stayed with him all the while, till he sent him out safely. For he has said, "I will not leave thee." Number 4. Some observe that when they were ordered into the ark, the men and the women were mentioned separately. Chapter 6, verse 18. Thou, and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives. Hence they infer that, during the time of mourning, they were apart, and their wives apart. Zechariah 12, verse 12. But now God did, as it were, new marry them, sending out Noah and his wife together, and his sons and their wives together, that they might be fruitful and multiply. Number 5. Noah was ordered to bring the creatures out with him, that having taken the care of feeding them so long, and been at so much pains about them, he might have the honor of leading them forth by their armies and receiving their homage. Numeral 2. Noah's departure when he had his dismission. As he would not go out without leave, so he would not, out of fear or humor, stay in where he had leave, but was in all points observant of the heavenly vision. Though he had been now a full year and 10 days a prisoner in the ark, yet when he found himself preserved there, not only for a new life, but for a new world, he saw no reason to complain of his long confinement. Now observe, number 1. Noah and his family came out alive, though one of them was a wicked Ham, whom, though he escaped the flood, God's justice could have taken away by some other stroke. But they were all alive. Note, when families have been long continued together, and no breaches made among them, it must be looked upon as a distinguishing favor, and attributed to the Lord's mercies. Number 2. Noah brought out all the creatures that went in with him, except the raven and the dove, which probably were ready to meet their mates at their coming out. Noah was able to give a very good account of his charge, for of all that were given to him he had lost none, but was faithful to him that appointed him, pro hac vice, on this occasion, high steward of his household. Noah's sacrifice, B.C. 2348. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more every thing living, as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seedtime and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Here is, numeral 1, Noah's thankful acknowledgement of God's favor to him, in completing the mercy of his deliverance, verse 20. Number 1, he built an altar. Hitherto he had done nothing without particular instructions and commands from God. He had a particular call into the ark, and another out of it. But altars and sacrifices being already of divine institution for religious worship, he did not stay for a particular command thus to express his thankfulness. Those that have received mercy from God should be forward in returning thanks, and do it not of constraint, but willingly. God is pleased with free will offerings and praises that wait for him. Noah was now turned out into a cold and desolate world, where, one would have thought, this first care would have been to build a house for himself, but behold, he begins with an altar for God. God, that is the first, must be first served, and he begins well that begins with God. Number 2, he offered a sacrifice upon his altar, of every clean beast and of every clean fowl. 1, the odd seventh that we read of, chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. Here observe, subscript 1, he offered only those that were clean, for it is not enough that we sacrifice, but we must sacrifice that which God appoints, according to the law of sacrifice, and not a corrupt thing. Subscript 2, though his stock of cattle was so small, and that rescued from ruin at so great an expanse of care and pains, yet he did not grudge to give God his dues out of it. He might have said, "Have I but 7 sheep to begin the world with, and must one of these 7 be killed and burnt for sacrifice? Were it not better to defer it till we have greater plenty?" No, to prove the sincerity of his love and gratitude, he cheerfully gives the 7th to his God, as an acknowledgment that all was his and owing to him. Serving God with our little is the way to make it more, and we must never think that wasted with which God is honored. Subscript 3. See here the antiquity of religion. The first thing we find done in the New World was an act of worship. Jeremiah 6, verse 16. We are now to express our thankfulness, not by burnt offerings, but by the sacrifices of praise and the sacrifices of righteousness, by pious devotions and a pious conversation. Numeral 2. God's gracious acceptance of Noah's thankfulness. It was a settled rule in the patriarchal age, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted." Noah was so. For, number 1, God was well pleased with the performance, verse 21. He smelt a sweet savor, or, as it is in the Hebrew, a savor of rest, from it. As when he had made the world at first on the 7th day, he rested and was refreshed. So now that he had new made it, in the sacrifice of the 7th he rested. He was well pleased with Noah's pious zeal, and those hopeful beginnings of the new world, as men are with fragrant and agreeable smells. Though his offering was small, it was according to his ability, and God accepted it. Having caused his anger to rest upon the world of sinners, he here caused his love to rest upon this little remnant of believers. Number 2. Hereupon he took up a resolution never to drown the world again. Herein he had an eye, not so much to Noah's sacrifice as to Christ's sacrifice of himself, which was typified and represented by it, and which was indeed an offering of a sweet-smelling savor. Ephesians 5, verse 2. Good security is here given, and that which may be relied upon. Subscript 1. That this judgment should never be repeated. No one might think, to what purpose should the world be repaired, when in all probability, for the wickedness of it, it will quickly be in like manner ruined again. No, says God, it never shall. It was said, chapter 6, verse 6, "It repented the Lord that he had made man." Now here he speaks as if it repented him that he had destroyed man. Neither means a change of his mind, but both a change of his way. It repented him concerning his servants. Deuteronomy 32, verse 36. 2 ways this resolve is expressed. Subpoint 1. I will not again curse the ground. I will not add to curse the ground any more. God had cursed the ground upon the first entrance of sin, chapter 3, verse 17. When he drowned it, he added to that curse, but now he determines not to add to it any more. Subpoint 2. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing. That is, it was determined that whatever ruin God might bring upon particular persons, or families, or countries, he would never again destroy the whole world till the day shall come when time shall be no more. But the reason of this resolve is very surprising, for it seems the same in effect with the reason given for the destruction of the world, because the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, chapter 6, verse 5. But there is this difference. There it is said, the imagination of man's heart is evil continually. That is, his actual transgressions continually cry against him. Here it is said, it is evil from his youth or childhood. It is bred in the bone. He brought it into the world with him. He was shapen and conceived in it. Now one would think it should follow. Therefore that guilty race shall be wholly extinguished, and I will make a full end. No, therefore I will no more take this severe method for. First, he is rather to be pitied, for it is all the effect of sin dwelling in him, and it is but what might be expected from such a degenerate race. He is called a transgressor from the womb, and therefore it is not strange that he deals so very treacherously. Isaiah 48, verse 8. Thus God remembers that he is flesh, corrupt and sinful. Psalm 78, verse 39. Secondly, he will be utterly ruined, for if he be dealt with according to his deserts, one flood must succeed another till all be destroyed. See here, number 1, that outward judgments, though they may terrify and restrain men, yet cannot of themselves sanctify and renew them. The grace of God must work with those judgments. Man's nature was as sinful after the deluge as it had been before. Number 2, that God's goodness takes occasion from man's sinfulness to magnify itself the more. His reasons of mercy are all drawn from himself, not from anything in us. Subscript 2, that the course of nature should never be discontinued. Verse 22. While the earth remaineth, and man upon it, there shall be summer and winter, not all winter as had been this last year, day and night, not all night as probably it was while the rain was descending. Here, subpoint 1, it is plainly intimated that this earth is not to remain always. It, and all the works in it, must shortly be burnt up, but we look for new heavens and a new earth, when all these things must be dissolved. But, subpoint 2, as long as it does remain, God's providence will carefully preserve the regular succession of times and seasons, and cause each to know its place. To this we owe it that the world stands, and the wheel of nature keeps its track. See here how changeable the times are, and yet how unchangeable. First, the course of nature always changing. As it is with the times, so it is with the events of time. They are subject to vicissitudes, day and night, summer and winter, counterchanged. In heaven and hell it is not so, but on earth God hath set the one over against the other. Secondly, yet never changed. It is constant in this inconstancy. These seasons have never ceased, nor shall cease. While the sun continued such a steady measurer of time, and the moon such a faithful witness in heaven. This is God's covenant of the day and of the night, the stability of which is mentioned for the confirming of our faith in the covenant of grace, which is no less inviolable. Jeremiah 33 verses 20 and 21. We see God's promises to the creatures made good, and thence may infer that his promises to all believers shall be so. End of chapter 8.